This is Jocko Podcast number 70 with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Willink. Good evening, Echo.
Good evening.
Now I was going to start off tonight with a warning that tonight's episode is going to contain things that are not appropriate for children. But then as I put together the notes, I realized that maybe the opposite is true. And that maybe this is an important episode that children do need to listen to. But I would say listen to it alone by yourself first without your children, and then decide if and when they are ready to listen to this. And unfortunately, I will tell you that I think the time is likely sooner than you think, and it is most definitely sooner than it should be. Now, normally, I am talking about war. And in that light, I have covered some of the most heinous and horrible things that have happened in the world. Evil things. Like evil people. And the things that I'm talking about are things that happen on a large scale in war. Battles between nations and armies versus armies and men against men. And in those situations, on that global stage of war, as I always say, we see the best of human nature, and we often see the worst. But sometimes the worst of human behavior, the most evil of human behavior, does not occur on the battlefield. And it is not driven by war. It's not brought on by the madness of combat. It's not the result of men trying to kill other men. Sometimes the most evil side of human beings sneaks around in the dark, lurking, waiting, preying on the weak, the scared, and the defenseless. Preying on children. And often it isn't some archetype of evil, like the picture you have in your head of some sneering predator with a sadistic look. It can often be a trusted neighbor or a family friend or even a relative. And to talk through some of this with me tonight, I'm honored to have a special guest on, an amazing person that I admire for her toughness and courage. An incredibly strong woman, loving mother, and extremely extremely hardworking and highly productive farmer. And last but certainly not least, an incredible wife to one of my very close friends who has done multiple combat tours overseas, leaving this wonderful woman back on the home front to handle the business at home. And her name is Iris. And my first solid memory of Iris, and I'd met her before this, but I didn't really think too much about it, but I was driving out to see her husband out on their farm that they live on, and I pulled up in my vehicle, my minivan, I'm quite sure, and I'm looking across this expanse of land, and out there in the field, fully 9 months pregnant, guiding a horse-drawn plow. Right? I'm talking, it looks like it's 1729 out there. Dang. Horse-drawn plow in the field in the summertime in the inland of Southern California, so it's hot and dusty. And she sees me and she ties off the horse, and then she comes walking over to me, and she's wearing the actual spurs like you see in a Western movie, that jingle jangle, no kidding. And she's a small framed woman, and she took off, she had a pair of leather gloves on that looked like they were passed down from the Marlboro Man. It just all worked. And she took one of those off and it gave me a handshake, and her skin was basically as tough as the leather gloves she was wearing. And she, said, hey, and pointed me towards her house where I'd find her husband, who was in there, watching TV or something in the air condition. And then she turned around and walked back and headed back out the field. Again, she was 9 months, straight up 9 months pregnant. Dang. And I thought to myself, damn. Impressive. What an awesome woman. So, years later, I would say maybe 4 or 5 years later, I was extremely moved and angered and disturbed and thankful and awed all at the same time when she posted an article online about something she had experienced as a child. And here is an excerpt of what she wrote. I was only 5 years old the first time it happened. I wasn't feeling well, so while everyone else went down the hill to cut firewood, I stayed back at the cabin in bed. I remember him coming back, coming through the door and telling me he needed to get a chainsaw file. He then came over to the bed, told me to lay still, and pulled my pants down. I was a shy child and would never, ever have questioned an adult at that age. He inserted his fingers into my vagina, and I remember it hurting, and I was just petrified. I had no idea what to do. He said things to me like, "Doesn't that feel good?" And "You like this, right?" I was unable to say anything. Or, I don't know, I may have even mumbled agreement with him because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. I just remember that it hurt, and I was scared, and I was confused. The sound of my parents' truck pulling up the driveway stopped him, and he carefully pulled my pants back up and went over to the sink and washed his hands, as if washing away the evidence. He then pulled me close and told me that this was a secret, just between us. It was so cliche, it amazes me now that that's what he said. And how well it worked. Now, I have faced fear. I've faced horror. I've faced evil. But I faced it as a full-grown man who spent pretty much my entire life being trained to fight and to kill and prepared to die. And furthermore, when I was in those situations, not only was I a full-grown man, I was with my brothers in arms to my left and to my right. But to face this kind of evil as a child, as a little girl, and I have 3 daughters, as a little girl, scared, defenseless, and alone. This is almost impossible for me to comprehend. And I know that I can learn a lot from the type of person that can survive this kind of abuse. I know we can all learn a lot, especially from a person with the strength to confront this evil and overcome it, and then put together an amazing and beautiful life with an amazing and beautiful family. We can all learn from this. And with that in mind, Iris, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for coming on.
Wow, thank you, Jocko. It's really an honor to be here.
And like all of our guests, now you have to tell us about the beginning. Where you came from, what was going on in your life. And your life is very interesting. I remember when your husband first met you, and he was kind of telling me about this girl he had met, and I was, when you hear your story, you just think, damn, that's awesome. And so tell us a little bit about that, about your childhood. You had a lot of very cool experiences in your childhood and grew up in a almost completely unique way that I don't think I've ever met anyone else that grew up like you did.
Yeah, I never realized it was really unique until I was an adult and got out in the world a little bit more and realized that most people anywhere near my age did not grow up the way that I did. So we lived in the mountains in Northern California. My dad was initially a miner, a gold miner, and he would go into old mine shafts and bring out ore that they would crush in a small mill and then refine the gold down into bars that they would sell. And eventually he became a timber faller and a logger. Back in 1987, I was 7 years old. There's a huge forest fire that burned through Northern California, and I remember it vividly because one night there was just this wall of fire rolling down on our house, and luckily our house was spared, but a lot of our neighbors lost their homes. And after that, a lot of logging came into the area because there was so much burned timber.
So a lot of people have parents that might be working in mines. They might have parents that are working as, loggers or lumberjacks, but they still might have things in their house like power and heat and electricity.
Yeah.
So you guys were like off the grid, right?
Yeah, the whole area. So this place is probably one of the most rural places in this country still, unless maybe you get up into Alaska. It's in Northern California in the mountains. There's this gorgeous river valley there, and it still doesn't have electricity. The people that live there still just use some solar now or generators, but no one had that back when I was a kid. So yeah, we grew up with no power, no telephones, no television. We used the old school kerosene lanterns with the little thin glass globes, and you would carry those from room to room. If you needed light, we would take them to bed with us at night and read by kerosene lantern. And we had a wood cook stove that we cooked on. Just to get hot water, our wood cook stove had coils that ran through it that the water would run through and warm it. So you would have to start a fire in the stove to have any hot water to warm it. So yeah, it was interesting. I take power and things like that for granted now, but back then it was just normal.
Yeah, I was going to say it becomes normal for kids. I know that, for instance, when my kids were little, they just thought that everyone did jujitsu because we did jujitsu all the time. They just thought, oh yeah, well, doesn't everyone do jujitsu all the time? Mm-hmm. But just no power, and that's kind of their. It's hard for people to even imagine that nowadays.
Yeah.
When you're a kid and you don't have an iPad to entertain you, you don't have a TV to entertain you, well, the creativity has to be there, right? It has to develop.
Absolutely.
Because what did you do for fun?
Well, we
hit
had
rocks.
Yeah.
I know. See, when I was a kid,
much.
when I was a kid, it was like every stick you could find turned into a machine gun,
mm-hmm.
and every rock you found turned into a grenade, and that's what we did. How would you even know what a grenade was? Or, how would you know what a doll was?
Yeah. We had a few toys, but, I see the toys that kids have now, and it definitely is
kind of different.
is very different. We had a few old toys, but mostly we just lived outside. Outside was our playground, our toys.
And then where were you guys getting food from?
We always had a big garden. My mom grew a huge garden and canned and froze, didn't freeze. We didn't have electricity for a freezer, but canned and dried food. And we had our own milk cows. We raised pigs, which that was kind of interesting too. We had a lot of pigs. My sister and I used to sleep outside in this in the summers when the weather was nice. There was this old stone root cellar with like a loft that had open ends, and we would sleep up there whenever the weather was a little bit iffy, and it was right over top of the pig pen. So we essentially grew up in a barn. We would wake up in the middle of the night with pigs squealing and turn our flashlights on and shine the lights down there and watch like litters of piglets being born. And these weren't even normal pigs. They were like wild boars that we'd caught and bred. And so they were all hairy and long snouts, and they weren't like your fat pink pigs that you get that most people raise.
And was there any kind of school up there?
There was a tiny little school that we went to. When I lived there, it was sort of the height of the population. There's less people there now, but there was the mining and the logging had brought in a few more people. And so the school that I went to had about 25 kids from K through 8. So there's maybe a couple of kids per grade. And we were all in the same, there was like 2 rooms, the big kids room and the little kids room. And we were so close because there were just a few of us, and we were all of the kids that I grew up with had a very similar upbringing to the way I did. So there are at least 25 other kids out there in the world who grew up exactly the same as I did. But we were this pack of just feral children, really, that just lived in the woods and swam in the river and did everything. And I have wonderful memories of that, which offset a lot of the not so pleasant things that happened in that same time.
Did you, what about books? Did you guys have a ton of books? Did you read? Was that sort of your one escape from the reality that was around you?
Yeah, we didn't have television, and in the summers we were mostly outside in the river, in the woods. We would go down to the river in the evening and watch the bears catch salmon. And
sounds like a pretty normal afternoon for a 5-year-old.
But in the winter, when it was cold and rainy, we read a ton. And I've got the best big sister in the world. She's a couple years older than me. And she was reading these just ridiculously age-inappropriate books. I remember her reading these huge novels when she was like 10 years old, because we didn't have any money, and it wasn't like our parents went out and bought us the newest children's books or anything to read. We just read whatever happened to be laying around, and oftentimes that was not what you would typically give a 10-year-old to read. But so she started reading to herself, and then she would read to me before I was, and eventually I became a very avid reader too. But yeah, that was a big part of our life. In fact, Cormac McCarthy is also one of my very favorite authors, if not my favorite author. I think I read All the Pretty Horses and The Crossing when I was like 15. I'd read Blood Meridian by the time I was 16. I've read them all numerous times.
Yeah,
but I remember this wonderful old neighbor lady that lived down the road from us gave me this box of a big cardboard box full of old Louis L'Amour and Zane Grey novels, which, for anyone who's not familiar with those, they're Westerns. They're all Westerns. And that was, the way you talk about being a kid and sort of wanting to be a soldier, wanting to be in the military so bad, and that was like, you were focused on that, and that's all you were going to do. That was me, but with horses. That was the only thing I cared about. And so I just gobbled up all of these old Westerns and lived in that world of imagining myself being like a cowboy riding across the plains with my bedroll, but I didn't have a horse. So, I lived in the woods as much as I could. We foraged, we found, we hunted for wild mushrooms all the time, which is still one of my very favorite things to do. And I used to read mushroom and plant field guides like other kids might read, fantasy novels or something.
So it's definitely unique, and a lot of really, that's just an unbelievable experience, and it sounds like you definitely, a lot of positivity. There's so much positivity to that, the way you grew up.
It was a very idyllic childhood. Yeah. I would say that I have a lot of darkness in that same time, but I wouldn't trade the way that I grew up for anything.
So let me talk a little bit about that darkness. And I kind of talked about in that opening of how it started and the first time it happened to you, this abuse that you suffered. Now I'm going to go back to this article that you wrote. And here we go. Again, this is from a 5-year-old. I was confused mostly. I don't think it ever crossed my mind to tell my parents. I just knew that I had been instructed not to tell anyone, so that's what I did. I really didn't understand what he had done or why, but I definitely knew that what had been done was wrong, and it might be something that I would be punished for. From that moment on, my life became one big game of cat and mouse. I tried to avoid him, and he pursued me and took every opportunity to get his hands on me. He had plenty of opportunities because he was a beloved and trusted family friend. Even right in front of my parents and other people, he would regularly slap my butt and pull me onto his lap. I would always squirm away as quickly as I could. I remember being left home with him. I remember throwing fits and begging to go along with my mom and my sister. My mom just thinking I was acting out and being a brat, and would tell me to stay with him until they got back. The fact that no one realized what was happening by simply observing the situation still bewilders me. So this guy, like you said here, this guy had full access to your house, full trust of your parents. Why is it that you think, or expand, you kind of talk about it a little bit, but what is it that makes a kid hold that information in when something bad is happening like this?
So I think it started happening with me when I was so young that I didn't understand it. I did not understand what was even going on. No one had ever told me that something like that might happen. And I was told not to say anything by an adult, and so I didn't. And I think I definitely had a feeling that I knew something was wrong and that this was not what should be happening. But a lot of it was probably just my personality type. I was a shy, quiet kid, and I wasn't inclined to express my emotions that much anyways. And I think people who do this sort of thing, they look for a specific type of kid. They're not stupid. They know how to single out just the right kid. And that was me in that time. And I had a lack of understanding of what was even going on. I didn't really know that it was definitely something that I should tell other adults.
And I'm thinking that in your situation, in your upbringing, you're seeing nature, right? Mm-hmm. You're understanding that pigs are having babies. I mean, you're seeing this kind of thing take place, but it wasn't something that your family talked about, the birds and the bees or anything like that. Just didn't come up.
Yeah, not really. And definitely not in. I think that it's hard for people to believe that their best friend or close family members would ever harm their children. And so I suspect that my parents felt like they kept a pretty good eye on me and that I was fine because they didn't look where they needed to look.
I think and I'm sure Echo has some kind of bias, psychological bias for this, but anytime you're in a situation where there's something that you simply could never imagine and couldn't believe, and if something that you could never imagine and couldn't believe happening and you're not being told about it, what would plant that in your mind, to make you think that it's going on? From your parents' perspective, it's like me looking at one of my close friends. I would never have that thought. And so where would it come from? And you kind of see how it would not.
And you'd probably think that your kid would let you know if there was a problem, right? You would be like, well, I would be able to tell if something was wrong because my kid would let me know somehow. And that's not necessarily the case.
I'm going to go back as you continue this, back to your writing here. We moved into our own house, and I would have some moments of peace. But he was always around, always visiting, and even parked a trailer on our property to live in for periods of time. He stalked me like I was his prey. I never, ever felt safe from him. He would watch me constantly. I would look up from playing with toys and see him standing in the doorway of my bedroom, staring at me. I would wake up to him watching me. When I would have friends over, I would suddenly jump up and announce that we needed to go outside and play right now, because I would notice him watching us through a doorway or a window. Again, I can't even imagine what that had to feel like for a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old. And again, I picture my own children and their pure innocence that they live in, thankfully. And I can't, I mean, this is like a horror movie. You know, you're a kid and you're looking up and you're playing with your toys and you're reading your book or whatever, and you look up and you see this predator, you know, just stalking you all the time, and the discomfort that you had to just feel constantly, and no way to escape it. Do you think was there anything else that you can think of that you tried to do or tried to send a signal, or were you just so sort of enveloped by the situation that you didn't, you know, just like I was talking about, maybe your parents couldn't imagine what could be happening? Was it like you just couldn't imagine this not happening?
Yeah, pretty much. I think because it started when I was so young, it just was part of my life. And it was so consistent. It wasn't like something that happened and then didn't happen it was just like a daily part of my life. And so I don't think I really ever tried to signal. I remember one time there was a couple girls, some friends of my parents came and visited, and they had a couple girls a little bit older than me that came. And I remember the one girl, who was probably 12 at the time, telling me they spent the night, they slept outside, and she told me that when she woke up in the morning, my abuser had like crawled up onto her bed and started touching her leg, and she like jumped up and told him no and ran away. And she also didn't go tell a grown-up. She came and told me that this had happened, and I remember telling her what happened to me. And that's the only time as a child that I ever told anyone. And I remember us sitting there kind of discussing this. I was probably 8 maybe at the time. And we're like, well, I don't know why he does this. That's weird. I don't know, you know, and we just kind of discussed it and then never told anyone, even though she was even older and hadn't grown up with it. And I don't know if later on she told someone, but at the time she definitely didn't go tell her parents or my parents or anyone, which reaffirms the fact that your kids aren't necessarily going to tell you.
I know with my kids, you know, if they do something that they think is going to get them in trouble, especially in that 5, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, they're not going to tell you. They don't volunteer that information if they think it's something that they did wrong or think. So that's another little trap that occurs. Back to your writing here. He was old and was missing all of his teeth. He wore dentures sometimes, and sometimes he didn't. I remember him pinning me up against walls and counters and kissing me with his soft, toothless mouth and fingering me with his dirty hands. I wanted to vomit. I would never tell him no, though. Never tell him to get away from me. Never acknowledge that he was doing anything to me. I would just slip away from him as soon as an opportunity presented itself and mumble that I was going outside to play or down to the rock piles, my secret labyrinth of tangled blackberry brambles and boulders. He would follow me to the top of the trail saying things like, "Come back, you like what I'm doing." Or, I don't think your mom wants you to go down there while she's gone. But he never followed me down into the rock piles. It was my safe zone. It was the place I could cry with no one seeing me. I remember someone accusing him of molesting another little girl. I heard my parents talking about it, and then my dad pulling me aside and asking me if Mike had ever touched me. I was caught off guard and totally unprepared to deal with what saying yes would mean. So I said no. As soon as it was out of my mouth, I wanted so badly to change my answer, but no one ever asked me again. I'm convinced that if I had had a little time to think and had been asked again, I would have spilled it all. Remember that. It's important. But at the time, I said no, and the woman who made the accusation was discredited as being crazy or a drug addict and having ulterior motives. And that was that. So there's a clear example. And I could see now, going from the perspective of a parent who's all uncomfortable to go up and ask this question in the first place. You know, it was probably the weakest form of questioning too. Yeah. You know, like, has Mike ever made you feel weird? Mm-hmm. And no. Okay, he's good. Yep. Now good. Dad's like, okay, see, I told you this is no issue. She's a liar. She's a drug addict. And
they want that answer. They want to hear no. Yeah. Any parent wants to hear no when they ask that.
And yet, you got to ask again. You got to put it probably in multiple different ways of asking the question. Not just does he make you feel comfortable, does he touch you? You got to ask that in so many different ways to open up the mind of the kid. You know, obviously without asking leading questions, right. You know, that's gonna put somebody, you know, in another weird situation. Yeah. How do you ask your own kids?
So I think that you have to talk about it casually, hopefully before something happens. Make them aware of the fact that this does happen. And people think that they're protecting their kids by not telling them that horrible stuff happens. They feel like they're protecting them by shielding them from this. And meanwhile, their kids are being molested and don't know how to tell anyone because no one's talked to them about it. And so you can start talking to them when they're really young, use simple terms, and express that sometimes people do bad things, and there's something. I tell my kids that there's something broken in some people's brains that makes them do something that normal people don't do, but that they're out there. And I think when you question a kid about this, you have to ask it once and then give the kid time to think about it. And then bring it up casually again a couple days later. Hey, you remember that thing we talked about the other day? I was thinking about it some more. Do you have, is there anything else you want to talk to me about with that? And do that a few times, especially if you suspect anything, for sure. But even if you don't, bring it up once, bring it up again a couple days later, bring it up again a couple days later. Give their little brains time to process and then make sure to tell them that if anything happened, even if they're not telling me anything did, they're not going to be in trouble if they feel like they want to tell me something. Now, some kids are just vocal and will talk fine, but other kids won't. And that's the kind of kid that you have to eke it out of.
And if you think about this, you could actually develop a pattern with your kids where they're not talking about molestation, but if when they tell you something, you punish them because they told you the truth, because they took a cookie, dropped the cookie jar, spilled milk, and they could have kept it a secret, but they told you, and now you punish them. You're doing the same thing. You're setting them up to keep secrets and keep things inside.
I always tell my kids that they'll get in more trouble for telling me a lie than for whatever they did in the first place.
My kids absolutely know that, and that's the same with never mind kids. When I was in the teams, that's the standard. You tell me what happened. Don't lie to me what happened. If you tell me something, you did something wrong, there was an incident, something bad happened, we'll handle it. But one thing we can't do is if we try and cover something up and we get caught, now there's going to be hell to pay. So yeah, that's
another thing that I do with my kids is there's some great books out there about talking to your kids about abuse and stuff. And there's one that I read to them sometimes, and it's not, those books aren't meant to just read once and never pick up again. They're a perfect opportunity to bring it up casually in conversation. There's a book, it's called I Said No, and it's written by Zach and Kimberly King. And Zach is a little boy, and his mom, Kimberly King, and they wrote this book together. And it's really great. It talks about people as being like red flag people, and those people can be the sort of people who just give you a strange feeling. They unsettle you. They make you feel a little bit odd, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they've done anything wrong to you, but you should be able to pick out those red flag people and then talk to an adult about what is making them uncomfortable.
Now is that because this red flag person did something that gave them a red flag? Because one of the things that I told my kids, especially now that my daughters are older, you know, one of my daughters was going on a trip somewhere, and I was giving her the talk, you know, listen, you need to watch out. And my daughter said something to me like, Dad, I'm not going to be, you know, going and hanging around with some weirdo. And I stopped her right in her tracks. And I said, it's not the weirdo, the guy that looks weird. It's not the guy that looks like a predator that you need to watch out for. The guy that you need to watch out for is the guy that seems like a nice guy, the guy that just, you know, helped you with your luggage, is the guy. Not all of them, but you need to watch out for that. I mean, if you look at some of those serial killers, you know, I think it was Ted Bundy, but he had the whole thing where he had his arm in a cast. And he would ask someone to help him. He would ask a woman to help. Hey, I need to get my groceries in the car or whatever. And they'd see this kind of, and if you ever saw a picture of him, he looks like a nerd. And he has his arm in a cast, and he's got a collared shirt on. He looks like a white collar guy, and he's got a car. And you know, next thing you know, as soon as they, you know, help with the groceries, boom, the arm's out of the cast, and he's abducting them. And so how do they identify like the red flag people? It's
more about your gut intuition. If there's something that just makes you feel a little bit weird, if they say something, you know, it's about listening to that internal voice that might be telling you something's a little weird, but he's a really nice guy, you know, and learning how to identify that and listen to it. Because, that's, like I said, pedophile, sexual predators, they're not stupid people. Most of them aren't stupid people. They're very calculating, and they look for the right opportunities. So you've got to teach your kid specifically that.
Yeah, and it seems like you need to teach your kids specifically the I said no part, right? Because even you as a kid, you don't know how to say no. You don't know how to scream. You don't know how to tell someone to stop. And also how to identify what, you know, kids don't know where the line is. If you don't teach them what's right and what's wrong in terms of physical contact with them, then how are they going to know? How are they going to know?
Exactly.
That's a good point. Now you You don't want to scold the kid for making a mistake, and how you hold lying as in higher regard as far as violations go. Where if this environment is kind of created that what you say doesn't mean that much, so be careful with what you say, But if the environment is, hey, you can come to me with anything, and you demonstrate that, don't just say like once a month, say, hey, you can come to me with anything. Next day they come to you with something, and you're like, hey, I'm busy, or hey, grown-ups are talking, Yeah. So if you actually provide that environment consistently, they'll come to you with anything that's off. They'll be like, hey, Mom, what's this? Hey, there's a rabbit in the backyard, So even something that small.
Yeah.
So some weirdo or some red flag person comes and they're doing something strange out of the ordinary, they're going to come to you way more likely,
Yeah, we talk about inoculation when it comes to training for combat, and you inoculate yourself to stress, and one of the things I talk about, like with self-defense especially for women, is if you train jiu-jitsu, you get inoculated to the fact that someone's going to be grabbing you, touching you, grinding on you, and so you're over that. But it seems like this is the same situation you do with kids, where you inoculate them to the uncomfortable conversations. So they're okay talking about stuff that, let's face it, your kid is not going to be comfortable talking about some things unless you inoculate them and you get them used to it and they understand what's right and what's wrong.
I think it's correct how what you said. It's the parents are typically the ones going to be more uncomfortable. Like the kid, you'd be surprised what kids will just talk about.
Yeah.
Like weird stuff. Unless you made it uncomfortable for them, they'll talk about some weird stuff, especially 5, 6. But if the parents, hey, in your scenario where they'll ask you something, you give them an answer, they say, good, that's the answer I want. Let's don't talk anymore, because they're uncomfortable.
And it's on the parent to initiate these conversations. It's not on the little kids to come to you and tell you something big has happened. It's on you as a parent to initiate these conversations. Yeah. My daughter is, she's shy, and she doesn't express her emotions very well. She's not the kind of kid who comes and just tells you stuff. And I don't want this to sound like I'm beating this stuff into my kids' heads every day and terrorizing them with the thought of scary things that might happen to them, because I'm not. I talk about it casually enough, I think, that it gets through to them. But she's in kindergarten, and she had a little issue, and she told me that a boy had been coming up to her on the playground, and I always use correct terminology, because that's another thing I feel like kids should be comfortable talking about their bodies. And she told me, and it was hard for her to tell me. She didn't want to tell me, and I could totally see it because of her personality. She came up and she told me that a little boy was coming up every day on the playground and like poking her in the vagina and then asking her to do the same to him. And I think she's 5. She told me that, and I was like, okay, what I'm doing is working, because knowing her personality, she didn't want to tell me that, but she did. And so that was also the perfect experience to sort of teach, like, okay, cool, not a big deal. He's 5 years old. Little kids do that and they don't know what they're doing, but let's go talk to your teacher and make sure, and I immediately took action and showed her that I wasn't going to let anything happen to her if she was uncomfortable with it, without blowing it out of proportion.
I was going to say, because a lot of times what kids are embarrassed about from age whatever
is you making a scene.
Is they don't want to tell you, because Dad, my 17-year-old will do that, as will my 7-year-old. Dad, So I think that's another thing, is how do you make sure that they realize that you're going to be, without blowing it out of proportion, which I agree with you. It's a 5-year-old kid. It's a 5-year-old boy.
Yeah.
They're doing, like you said, they're talking about stupid stuff that they don't understand, and they're doing things that they don't understand yet. That's like, okay, but let's now teach them. Let's let them learn at that
and
age.
that gave me a lot of confidence that if something, because she dealt with that in a great way, if something bigger were to happen, I now feel like she would be much more inclined to come to me. But what you're saying about not wanting to make a scene, I think as I got older and understood what was happening to me a lot more than I did when I was little, I didn't want to make a scene. This is somebody who was my parents' best friend, was deeply involved in our life, had been with us forever. And imagine what telling would look like. And that wasn't something that I was prepared to handle. Even when I was a teenager and I knew exactly what was going on and I knew exactly how wrong it was, the scene that would ensue if I said something was not something that I was willing to deal with.
That's even hard for adults to do. Any kind of like confrontation that's going to cause these big ripples, it's like, man, I got to weigh all this out now. You know, like, can I strengthen myself up versus, you know, create this big scene? I'd rather deal with strengthening myself up and dealing with it.
Especially because
almost.
you have no idea. In your mind, you probably made it even a bigger, crazy scene. You were probably thinking that they were going to have to make a choice between you and this guy, you know? Maybe in your mind, that's their best friend, you know? Now you got to convince people, and it just becomes easier to just not say anything.
You don't know if they're going to believe you. You don't know if he's going to go to jail. You just don't know what the consequences are going to be. And it's much easier to just be like, all right, I've dealt with this. I can keep dealing with this. I'm not going to cause any ripples.
So as you grow up, I'm going to go back to your writing here. As I grew older, I got better and better at avoiding him. His hounding of me did not decrease, but I rarely let him get his hands on me. I was incapable of just telling him to get away from me if he got me cornered. I'm not sure how to explain what this is like, this constant pursuit and hounding that you are unable to avoid when you are a child. When I was 12 years old, we moved. It was over. 7 years of stress and fear and pain finally replaced with an empty discomfort. A weight was lifted from my shoulders. I got a horse and felt more freedom than I ever had. And then he followed. He bought a piece of property just up the hill from us, and that was the beginning of dealing with him as a teenager. I never let him touch me again. I tolerated his crude comments and ate dinner next to him at the dinner table. I laughed at his jokes, and I dutifully rode my horse up the hill to check on him every couple of days at the insistence of my parents. He would always come out of his trailer and lay a hand on my thigh, invite me to tie up and come inside. I still couldn't look him in the eye, still couldn't tell him to fuck off. Instead, I would just change the subject and ride off with a hollow pit in my stomach. So you move away and then he follows you there. And you know, you talk about how hard it is to explain this hounding that you got. And you're trapped. You don't feel like you can say anything to your family. You can't get away from him. And this has just got to be, I mean, you say a hollow pit in your stomach, and this has just got to be eating at you.
Yeah.
And you find finally some comfort in horses, which was already your dream, and now you finally get your first horse.
Yeah, that was the best thing that ever happened to me up until that point, at least. Maybe ever. There was a neighbor lady that lived close to us who had this horse that she didn't have time for, and she let me bring it home and start riding it. And my family never had horses. We knew nothing about horses other than my just insane desire to have one. And so I just started riding it. And this horse was half broke at best. And I would fall off constantly. I just would smack my head on the ice and get back on and fall off again. And I remember my dad one time standing there and just telling me, you got to stop. You can't, I'm not going to let you sit here and kill yourself trying to ride this horse. And, you know, of course, back then I didn't have a silly thing like a riding helmet or even a saddle. I just had this desire to ride this horse, and if it was gonna kill me, it was gonna happen. And so I did. I just kept after it and finally wore the poor horse down, and he gave up, and he ended up being, you know, by my side for many years. And so that gave me this whole different level of freedom. I wasn't, you know, constrained to my feet anymore. I could go out and get just miles and miles away from it all. And, you know, home wasn't a comforting spot for me to be. So I was much more comfortable being out in the mountains by myself with my horse. And some people might have an issue with this, but by the time I was 12, I was carrying a 30-30 rifle in a scabbard on my saddle. And I had a little Ruger 22 that I carried with me, you know, one or the other, usually when I was out riding, because my parents felt like I was safer with a gun than without a gun, even though I was 12 years old. I'd grown up around guns and was comfortable with them. And since I would head out in the mountains, and I think the only rule I had was that I had to be back by dark. And, you know, when you're on a horse and you leave first thing in the morning, you can cover a lot of ground. And if something had ever happened to me, I don't know how anyone would have even found me. So I had to be responsible and self-reliant to make sure that I was as safe as I could be out there. And I give my parents a ton of credit for allowing me that freedom. They had a daughter who had this passion to be doing what I was doing, and it was dangerous, and they let me do it. And that is a large part of what built me into who I am today. And so that, you know, that's something that I also try to do for my own kids as much as I can. You know, I'm pretty cautious with them, but I still try to always allow them a lot of freedom. I remember one time I think I was 15. I was riding away from home a little ways, and I was down in this creek bottom, and I heard this commotion down there, this like barking and noise, and I thought there were neighborhood dogs who would chase deer, and I thought that the dogs had a deer down in the creek bottom, and that was what went through my head. And I ran my horse down through the brush into this creek bottom, thinking I was going to scare the dogs off this deer. And I came out of the brush, literally from me to you, like 5 feet away from this mountain lion that was just in full snarling, crouched attack mode, and it was squared off with. I didn't know this when I was riding, but one of my dogs had followed me, and I hadn't seen it. And it was down in this creek bottom with this mountain lion, and they were face to face, just snarling and crouched down at each other. And I came out of the bushes right on top of them. And, you know, I didn't feel any fear at all. I just reacted, and I just knew I had to get a little space between myself and the lion. And I spun my horse around and got up the hill just a little ways and then stopped to watch the situation. And the dog was this big wolf chow cross. It was a big dog, but she got scared and she cut and ran. She decided she'd had enough, and she turned to run from this cat. And the second she turned to run, the cat had her. It just threw an arm over her back, reached under, bit her throat, and she just went limp. And then the cat just picked her up and carried her away.
Yeah, and that's because you're not supposed to turn your back on the.
Don't ever.
So even when you kind of rode away, I was kind of like, oh.
And the reason I did that is because the cat was
Engaged.
Distracted.
Right.
I wasn't the threat to the cat. I was the side thing. The threat was this dog. And thank goodness my horse was just a rock and didn't dump me right in front of this cat, because had that happened, there's no doubt in my mind that I would have been attacked. But, you know, things like that, that was my life. Things like that happened, and I was young, and I had to be able to deal with those situations.
How old were you at that point?
15.
And there's also this really, really strong dichotomy here, is that you're out in the wilderness on horseback, packing heat, you know, confronting mountain lions. And even with all that, you didn't confront this abuser. And that's another, you know, sign and indication to people of how hard it is psychologically for someone that's as strong as you were as a teenager, that's out there on your own. And like I said, riding around the mountains with a pistol and a rifle, ready to, you know, get after it. And yet this, by this point, kind of an old man is still has this level of control over you in your own home.
Yeah.
And that's just and I would say then at this point, maybe to fill that hole or to release some of that tension, you start going down a path that's not a good path for you to be going down in life.
Yeah. So when I was also 15, I met someone that lived a few miles away from us who was, I think he was in his 30s. He was an Indian guy, and he rode around the mountains on his horse as well. And it was, I developed a relationship with him. And, you know, he was not the kind of person that you would want your 15-year-old to be dating. But to me, it was just this romantic thing, and it was this escape. It was something different. It was someone that paid attention to me in a time when I was really struggling with my home life and who I was. I think the molestation abuse stuff got harder for me as a teenager, as even though it wasn't actively happening anymore, really, physically, it was messing with my mind a lot more because I understood it better. And so I started dating this guy who, you know, was a distraction to me from that. And, you know, in the way 15-year-olds will, I just became madly in love with him. And, you know, you can make your own conclusions about a 30-something-year-old man dating a 15-year-old. I certainly feel a lot different about it now than I did then. He told me that he wanted to marry me. Like, it was very serious in my mind. And then one morning I was riding away from home down this dirt road, and I remember a neighbor rancher pulled up alongside me and asked me if I'd heard what happened. And he told me that this man that I was in love with had been shot and killed.
What was the genesis of him being shot and killed?
It was, like I said, he wasn't the most upstanding person, and it had to do with marijuana and guns, and it was just a mess, and it was
kind
tragic.
Of a drug scenario.
Yeah, he wasn't a drug addict, but he led a life of Well, I'll just say it. He would steal people's marijuana plants from them and sell them. And it got him into trouble.
Yeah.
And I look back now on the road that relationship could have taken me down. And while it was this horribly tragic event for me at the time that sent me into an even deeper tailspin, now as an adult, the way I am, I'm almost thankful that it happened, because I think that had that not happened, who knows where my life would have gone.
And so what, there's first of all, I can see how 15-year-old Iris, who's dealing with this stuff at home and meets this guy that's, 31, and 31-year-old is, I don't care if he's a total idiot, he can manipulate the hell out of a 15-year-old all day long.
Yeah.
But regardless, you're in just a super vulnerable situation because of your mindset, and you end up here, in this relationship with this guy. Now he gets murdered, and you go, you end up just going even worse at the time.
Yeah, that was a hard thing for my 15-year-old brain to process. And shortly thereafter, my parents separated, not in an amiable fashion. My sister went off to college, so I was especially on my own because she was, my rock. And I just really went into a cycle of depression and misery. And by the time I was 16, I was dating a 32-year-old cop, which again, I have very different feelings now on what a 32-year-old cop is doing dating a 16-year-old. But he was this safety zone for me in a big way. He was this, strong, brave person who wasn't going to let anything bad happen to me. And I really latched on to that when I was just trying to find something in life to hold on to. And that ended up being a long on and off again relationship, which definitely was not healthy for me. And at that point in time, I started self-mutilating. I started cutting and burning myself. I was definitely very depressed. And it was not something that I knew how to communicate to anyone. I just was sucked into misery and self-pity, really.
And when you start hurting yourself, is that, at that moment, is it just so much anger and frustration that it somehow feels good to feel that pain or inflict pain on yourself? Or is it more of a, hey, everyone, look here, I'm doing this to myself, maybe you should pay some attention to me and help me? Or is it a little bit of both? Or is there something that I don't know and understand?
I would say it's definitely both. It's a funny thing, and it's hard to understand. It's sort of an addictive behavior. And, I've read about it some, and they say there's chemicals released in your brain and stuff when you feel physical pain that makes the emotional, that dulls the emotional pain and things like that. But it also, for me, I will absolutely say that, yeah, I think it was a cry for help. It was like somebody realize what, and as all teenagers do, you think that you're some rare exotic creature that's no one else has ever experienced anything you've gone through, and nothing anyone says to you matters because they don't know what they're talking about. But For me, yeah, a lot of it was a cry for attention, to have someone, and I got it. The thing is I got the attention. The cop that I was dating told my parents that I was doing this, and people kind of freaked out, and everybody thought that there was really something the matter with me, and I was really depressed, and I wouldn't, even though I was getting the attention and people were actually asking me, like, what's going on, why are you doing this, I wouldn't say, I would not tell anybody. I just was shut off. And it's like I wanted the attention, but then I still wouldn't say what. And maybe part of it is that I didn't even know, but I think what we talked about before of the not wanting to make a scene. I was not going to make a scene. At this point, my abuser was pretty old, but he was still alive, and he was still in our lives. He still, all the time. And people were asking me, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And I was not going to say.
I'm going back to your writing. By that time, I was already damaged by so many years of abuse, heartbreak, and death, painful and destructive relationships. My parents were divorced and angry. My sister had moved away. I was in a spiral of self-destruction and self-pity. I had taken to cutting and burning myself, scars that I still carry to this day to remind me of the way my life could have continued. And that's what you just talked about. And then at this point, you're 17 or 18 years old, and your abuser, who you just said was now an old guy, he dies. Then I'm going to continue. I'm not sure exactly when I woke up, when I shut off the self-pity fountain and realized that I was strong and indestructible. Somewhere in my early 20s. My 20s was a slow rebuilding of my life the way I wanted it. I traveled, wandered, worked as a horse wrangler around the West, had relationships with men who were kind and decent, got married, got divorced, made friends, built up a reserve of strength, and found myself little by little. So, one of the reasons that you're sitting here today, one of the reasons that I know you is that despite all that darkness that you got sucked into, you somehow, in some way, at some point, realized that you were going in the wrong direction, and you turned around and started to. And I know we've talked about it before. It wasn't like you woke up one day and said, "Today I'm going to change my life." You transitioned, you transformed over a period of time. You can't put you're not going to put a day on it. You didn't have a eureka moment, but you slowly started seeing yourself from a different perspective and realizing that the path you were on wasn't a good one.
So as soon as I graduated high school, I left to start working on ranches. I went to Montana, and I remember clearly I was 18, I guess, and I was working on a ranch in Montana, and someone had left laying around this dusty old copy of D.H. Lawrence's book of poetry. And I read this little poem, and it just stuck with me. And I'll read it here. It's, "I never saw a wild thing sorry for itself. A small bird will drop frozen dead from a bough without ever having felt sorry for itself." And I read those words, and they just hit me in the right place. And I'm not saying that in particular is what really started to make a change, but I read some more things, and I was growing older, and I was thinking about things differently, and my abuser had died, And that was probably the biggest weight that I've ever felt lifted off of me. Because now what I realized is even if I did choose to tell someone, it wasn't going to cause the kind of scene that it would have before. Now, I still didn't really choose to tell anyone, but that in itself, not having him actually be present was a big thing for me. And I realized that I had just been damaging myself, and I'd really been hurting people in my life. My parents, my sister, they were just confused. They didn't understand why I was doing what I was doing to myself. And I realized that I was just in this, I was being selfish and self-centered and just feeling sorry for myself. And I stopped. I just gained a little bit of perspective and made myself stop.
That perspective piece is so important. What's crazy, and I know we all have seen and everyone's seen people that are in the downward spiral. They're just caught in the downward spiral, whether it's a relationship, whether it's booze, whether it's drugs, whether it's behavior. You can see it. And when you're on the outside of it, it's so obvious. And you want to grab that person. And I'm sure everyone, I have literally grabbed my friends that I've seen in that downward spiral and shaking them and saying, get out, come here. All you have to do is come over here, step over here with me and look back and see what situation you're in and the direction you're heading. And unfortunately, you can't pull them out. You can't pull their head out and let them look back at themselves. They have to step out. They have to come to that recognition themselves. And that's one of the hardest things as a friend or as a family member, to watch that person. It's like watching a train wreck. And you know all you could do. You know you could press the brakes. You realize how easy it would be to just, hey, press the brakes, stop.
Yeah.
And yet we can't do it. We can't help people. We can't. Yeah. You have to help yourself. And so, I mean, obviously, that poem, seeing that was a form of you starting to take a look at it, starting to take a look at yourself from a different perspective. Maybe your abuser dying helped you start to look at that from a different perspective.
Definitely. It was a long, slow process for me, though. It didn't just happen overnight. I mean, I think I've made a very conscious decision not to hurt myself anymore, but you have to teach yourself how to think and feel. And that takes time to teach yourself to have the right kind of thoughts and feelings about things. And one thing that I wanted to say while I'm here talking about this is that just because I'm sitting here saying that I did this, that I woke up and stopped, doesn't mean that everyone who's experienced something like this should just get over it. If you have listeners, if you have a girlfriend or a wife or a sister or someone who has been through something like this, or maybe after listening to this show will confess to you that they've been through something like this, maybe they've never told you before. And maybe they'll tell you something that doesn't even seem like that big of a deal. Maybe it's not years and years of abuse or violence. Maybe it is something that, happened to them when they were young, and it's a sucky situation, but it's not horrible. It's not horrific. But she still feels violated. And it's this personal process that you have to go through. And friends and family and people that know someone is struggling with this definitely need to support in every way they can. But you also don't become a crutch. Just because someone has gone through something like this doesn't give them the right to drag everyone else down with them into their pit of depression and misery. So you support the best you can without enabling the bad behavior, because that's really what it is. It's bad behavior. There's people who've gone through much more horrific things than anything I have ever been through that have come out fine. And it's just getting your mind in the right place and taking control of your thoughts.
And I know, you have obviously experience being married to a military member, and I would say along the lines of what you just said is that people are going to handle things differently. And you can have two guys that were on the same exact combat deployment and did, pretty much the same things, and they're just going to have to deal with it in a different way. And maybe one guy gets over it pretty quick, or maybe one guy barely even reacts to it. Maybe one guy, it really hurts him and it takes him some time. And it sounds like it's the same thing with what you're saying. We have to be open to, hey, this may take some time and it may take a different course. And at the exact, again, to mirror what you just said, there's guys that just because they had some rough combat, that doesn't give them the right to, number one, drag themselves down the wrong path, and number two, drag their family and their friends down the wrong path. And I think definitely, saying, hey, look, I don't claim to understand what you've been through, but I do know this. Your behavior is not going to help it, right? The bottle isn't going to help it. The self-abuse isn't going to help it. The skipping work isn't going to help it. So I think those are fairly similar. Again, I'm not trying to say they're the same thing. I'm just saying that that dealing with them has a lot of similarities. Both guys that have been in combat trauma and people that have suffered this type of abuse. It seems like there's some similarities in the way that there's varied ways that they get handled.
There always has to be accountability for your own actions, no matter what you've been through. You can't just say, I've been through something horrible, so I can act like this.
Well, case in point, before we pressed record today, you and I were talking about, Colonel Reeder, who came on the show and who was a POW. And
he was amazing.
And you just think that guy, just has been through, and he's been through hell. And then he sits there during the podcast and says the same thing that you just said, which is, look, I had it rough, but there was plenty of guys that had it way worse than me. And I think I can't think of anything worse than a 2-foot tall bamboo cage in the middle of the jungle with rats eating my wounds, with my feet shackled into a bamboo shackle. That's just unbelievable. And to your point, he comes on and says, number one, other people have had it rougher than me. And number two, I'm happy for what I've got. And let's move forward.
Yeah. So it really wasn't until my kids were born that, this was in my mind all the time. I would say into my mid-20s, this is how prevalent it was. I probably thought about the abuse at least once every single day. It was always in my mind. And eventually I learned that I didn't need to waste my thoughts on that and learn to spend less time thinking about it. But it really wasn't until my kids were born, I think, and my daughter was 5 years old. She was just this little girl, and she was the same age that I was when I was already dealing with abuse. And that just made me burn with rage. And I realized that I felt that I had an obligation to speak about this. That it happens to so many kids. It's so prevalent in not, girls, but also boys. It's not just girls. It happens in higher number to girls, but it happens to both. And I felt like what I'd been through and what I had, I think I've come around and am a pretty well-adjusted person now, and that I had an obligation to talk about this because it's something that doesn't get talked about. It gets swept under the rug, and even people who have happened to get treated like there's something wrong with them, and they're embarrassed and they don't want to talk about it. And it's time for that to stop. It's time for us to start talking about it. And I feel like I'm resilient. I grew up with this really close proximity to nature, and I've seen animals suffer horrific wounds that should kill them. They don't have doctors, they don't have medicine, but they've got fire in their hearts and they don't feel sorry for themselves, and they survive. And I credit a lot of my resiliency to my upbringing in nature and observation of nature, and how it's cruel and it's beautiful. And creatures survive in the most difficult and challenging situations, and they flourish. And if they can do that, so can I.
That's awesome. That is just awesome. And you kind of went right to talking about your kids, or right to talking about your daughter. As you got out of that bad time of your life, you ended up meeting your husband, my friend, your husband. And my note here is that you meeting your husband was the best thing that ever happened to him. and that's another reason why I really wanted to bring you on and have you share some of your experiences. Obviously, the abuse and your survival and your attitude about all that, but bringing also that strength to. And people have always asked if I would bring my wife on, and my wife.
I do. She's wonderful.
She's wonderful. She's not coming on the podcast. It's not her. It's not her deal. But people always want to know, because there's a lot of young military families out there. And I'm gonna say this right now. I'm gonna talk about military families, and in the background, I just want everyone to think. First of all, that also applies to cops and first responders and firefighters. Maybe not to not to the same degree, but also just normal, hardworking Americans, men and women. You've got someone that's working hard and gone a lot and dedicating a lot to their job. So that applies across the board. But that being said, you're a military wife. My wife's a military wife, and you ended up in this situation. Well, you met your current husband, who's like I said, a good friend of mine, and I was on my very first deployment ever back in the day. Had to fit that one in. He was on deployment as well, and I think it was his second deployment. And we met and hit it off immediately. He kind of grew up. He grew up in California. I grew up on the East Coast, but we grew up with a similar kind of background, in that we were both kind of into hardcore music and metal and punk rock, and we were just into the same kind of stuff, and we recognized that immediately about each other, and so we became friends back then. And then we spent many years at different teams, but we ended up being together at SEAL Team 3. He was in a different task unit than me, but anyways, you got a guy, you ended up being married to a great guy, but who's a military guy deploying all the time. You didn't come from a military background. You didn't have military in your life. What was that like? How was it like being welcomed into the military family and the harsh realities of being married to a military member during a time of war?
Yeah, I definitely not from a military family. I barely knew what a Navy SEAL was. I wasn't impressed particularly with the fact that he was a Navy SEAL. I think that I'm fairly well suited to the lifestyle because I'm pretty independent, and I don't tend to be someone who frets a lot over what might happen. I know that he loves his job, and he's as well trained as he can possibly be to do the job that he does. And so, that's really all there is for me. And, of course, there's moments where you feel a little bit sorry for yourself and think, gosh, what if something happens? What if he comes home without his legs or with half his face shrapnelled or something? But, I don't anymore. That stuff doesn't get into my head much. And so I just don't really worry about it.
One of the you talk about being independent, and I know obviously you're an independent person. You can get along by yourself, and my wife's the same way, very independent in terms of her day to day. She doesn't need me to actually do anything for her. But I wrote down a note just to talk about another level of independence, and that's emotional independence, which I think is very important. I think it's something that spouses need to find for each other, because I think there's spouses that become emotionally dependent on each other. And that works in a day-to-day relationship if you're seeing each other all the time. But if your husband or your wife goes on deployment and leaves you for 6 months to 14 months to 18 months, if you're in a long deployment cycle, you are not going to have that emotional shoulder to lean on. It's not going to be there. And so you have to learn how to be emotionally independent. Now, what's scary about this is that obviously if you get so much emotional independence that you're no longer, you could lose connection, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what you have to watch out for. And I think what you see especially with younger married couples, the emotional independence from one person leads to some kind of emotional dependence on some other person that they meet. Next thing you know, we have a bad situation. So I think that emotional independence is something, if you talk about with each other, and you say, my wife was, one of the best things about my wife is I wouldn't even talk to my wife. Just not, I wouldn't send her an email. It'd be a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, no email, nothing, because I'm overdoing my job. And she wouldn't think to herself, oh, he's not talking. He didn't send me an email. Why aren't you emailing me? Send me. No. Like, hey, he's busy. She wasn't dependent on me for her emotions. So I think that's another important piece that you need to talk about with your spouse if you're in a military situation.
Yeah, my husband's pretty good actually about staying in touch with me and communication on deployments, but it's not because of emotionally being dependent on each other. That's just the way he is. He values my opinion on things a lot, and we talk about things, and so we do communicate quite a bit. But I completely know what you mean about and as being a wife sitting at home with your husband gone, like, you can't just sit there and pine over them being gone and wait for them to come home.
That's the point.
You have to have your own life. You have to carry on while they're gone. And that's the best way you can support them, I think, if you're, making them feel bad for not calling you every opportunity you get, and then laying a guilt trip on them about, the fact that they're not giving you enough attention and stuff when they've got, you can't do that. You've got to just take charge of your own life and do that while they're away.
Now, when they're away, obviously that's some things you deal with when they're away, and then you have other things that you have to deal with when they come back home, especially during a hard deployment. Now, I know a lot of civilians listen to this show as well, and it's important to recognize that there's different types of deployments. And
Definitely.
even during the same time period, exact same deployment cycle with 2 groups of people or 100 groups of people, there'll be some people that are in an area or in an area of operation or will have a mission set that will allow them to completely coast and enjoy themselves and have plenty of free time, and that can happen. Mm-hmm. And then the other end of the spectrum is you can go on deployment and you can think you can end up in total violence and chaos and mayhem. And I just thought of this. My first deployment to Iraq, we did a lot of operations. It was cool. It was fun. They were really good operations. And when I got back, when I was there, I was thinking, man, I wish I would have brought my guitar, because, I had some time, I'd be like, maybe I could have probably played guitar for, half hour a day, maybe 45 minutes. If a couple other guys would have brought their guitar, we could have had some little jam sessions, right? And we were working a lot. Our op tempo was high. We were working. We were probably, we were doing probably a mission every 1, 2, or 3 days. We were out. So my next deployment, I said to myself, cool, bring a guitar, with time, work on the riffs.
Sure.
Go back, and this deployment was to Ramadi. And I think Leif and I played guitar.
Not so much time.
We played guitar one time when there was like 3 days left in deployment. We broke out our guitars, and there was another task unit there now, and we were turning over. But that shows you the difference. And we literally did not have any time to do any of that. And obviously the pressure of combat on my second deployment to Iraq was 1,000 times more intense. And I know that your husband has done multiple deployments as well, and they varied in stress level, and they varied in amount of combat and amount of direct combat and his leadership situation. But I know that, not too long ago, he went on a deployment that was definitely high stress, and they saw a lot of hard combat. And when he came home from that, what was that like? What did you notice? And what do you think other people should look for?
So the very first night he was home from that deployment, I woke up in the middle of the night and he was standing over the bed holding a gun. And that sort of shocked me a little bit and made me realize that I was dealing with something a little bit different. I talked to him on deployment, and over the course of the deployment, I could hear his voice changing. I could tell that he was changing. It was strenuous, and there was a lot of engagement. And when he came back, he just, when he woke up in the middle of the night, his immediate response, he just heard a noise, the dogs barked or something, and he just jumped for a weapon. He just startled easily, and that was his reaction. He had definitely a shorter temper. Little things that he shouldn't have been getting mad about were setting him off. Just dumb stuff. Somebody would say something or do something, and he would get so mad about it. And it was like, take it down a notch. He started, I don't want to make it sound like he was doing this in a terrible way, but he definitely started some self-medicating with alcohol. He was relying on sleeping pills to get to sleep. He has never been much of a drinker. I'm not a drinker at all, and so when I noticed him drinking more than he normally would every single night, that immediately was a red flag to me. And then the sleeping pills, this Ambien is powerful stuff and can really be a bad road to go down. And
yeah, guys definitely get on that Ambien road, and I've seen guys go down that road, and it's just like all of a sudden they can't sleep without Ambien, and it messes up your sleep cycle and everything else. So
definitely,
and I guess that there's times when people need it, but I think guys in the military slip really easily from a guy that needs it to a guy that's just doing it because they're starting to rely upon it.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's weird that you talk about, we just had Dave Burke, who was an Anglico guy, Ford air controller on the ground with my did a lot of work with my task unit in Ramadi, and he was an F-18 pilot. He was Top Gun. Echo just thinks he was straight up Tom Cruise, but he was on the ground with us in Ramadi for a hell of a deployment and saw a lot of stuff and in some very intense direct combat. And exactly what you just said, like a couple of things, he said when he was talking about when he got home and he got in the car with his wife and his mom. He was in there for 10 minutes and they were having a normal conversation. All of a sudden he yelled at him. Like his temper was just short. So there's the temper, the increased temper. So that's one thing people definitely get. And the other thing, the startle response, which Dave talked about as well, was, he heard air gun for putting the working on a car. He was walking by a garage and somebody fired off an air gun and he grabbed his wife and threw her to the ground, right?
Yeah.
And he was like, he said while he was doing it, he already realized, what am I doing?
Yeah,
but it was too late.
Reaction.
So those are things to watch out for. And then what about I know you talk about the sleep pattern.
Yeah, he definitely wasn't sleeping normally. And so, I started to see this stuff and I was like, this isn't a road that we want to go down. And so I told him that I thought he really needed to go see a psych. And luckily in the SEAL teams, there's good access to that. And also, fortunately, my husband listens to me.
Luckily for him.
He values my opinion. And if I say something is amiss, then he believes that something is amiss. And so he went and saw the psych, and I think Doc Parsley, I think you've talked about him before, helped him to get on to just a healthier sleep cycle, cut out all the medication. He doesn't take any medication at all anymore, never any sleep pills or anything. Started taking like some herbal supplements and stuff, and he takes some Alpha Brain now. And and it didn't take long. He made a few appointments with the psych. That definitely helped him to realize that he wasn't acting normally, because I don't think when you guys come back, you've already been used to operating on the elevated level for a while, and you don't realize that you're now home with your wife and your kids, it's and you're still trying to operate on that level.
It's like intensity. That, the boil a frog thing, where you just, that's normal to you. Mm-hmm. It's normal. You don't sense it when you're overseas. You just are getting ramped up, and you're staying in this heightened state all the time, and everything is intense all the time, but you don't notice it. And so when you come home, you don't notice that it shouldn't be like that right now.
Yeah. And that's where it's really important for the family, spouses and stuff to, keep an eye on these guys and hopefully channel them in a good direction when they get home, as opposed to, had I not stepped in, and I mean, my husband's, he's been a SEAL for a long time. He's been through a lot of stuff, but, he definitely could have gone down a road that wouldn't have been healthy for him or his career.
No doubt about that. I just remembered this when it was either right after you right after you moved down here, I think. I was talking to him because I was talking about where you guys were living, mm-hmm. out and you guys had property. You hadn't bought property yet, but you were renting mm-hmm. a big property and you had horses and everything. And I said, oh man, what made you move out here? This is awesome. And he's like, yeah, my wife told me she wouldn't come down here unless I got her a property with horses on it. And here we are. It's like, awesome. That's killer.
Yeah.
And then, you talked a little bit about your kids and how that helped you. But you in the meantime, as you were having kids, when you got down here, you started straight up farming.
Yeah. I mean, that was a condition to him having me was that I was not going to put my horses in a stable and go see them once in a while. Like, they were going to come with me, and we needed land for them to be horses, wild horses like they were used to being. And so
Conditions.
he made that
Conditions were
happen.
met.
He made it. He did. He made it happen. And we got a great 18-acre piece of property, and we've got 5 fat horses now out in the field every time I look out. And I'd never farmed before. I'd always been a horse wrangler. And I started just growing a little garden, and I was like, oh, I love this. And I heard about a CSA program, which is basically where you grow a bunch of stuff and you sell a box of whatever your farm is producing every week to people who pay, they'll pay to get their box of fruits and vegetables. And I was like, oh, I could do that. I could get a few people and start to do that. And so I did. I started out with like 10 families that I'd do boxes for, and realized that I really liked it. And it gave me a lot of focus when he was deployed. It gave me a lot of something to really throw myself into and focus on.
She wasn't going to pick like knitting or playing cards. I'm going to run a farm. How you like that?
And then, we had kids kind of right around that same time. And so that was a little challenging in itself, to be trying to like get this farm up and going, and being, in the beginning you talked about me being like 9 months pregnant out there working, and
straight
that's
up
what I
plowed a
did.
Field.
But it was awesome. I loved it, and I've managed to build up a pretty decent little business. And there's nothing that I find more rewarding in life than growing good food. There's something about it that's, and for my husband too. Like, I do most of the technical farm work. He's more of my farm boy, maybe.
Labor.
Yeah, but it's very therapeutic for him, I think, when he comes back from deployments and stuff, and he can just kind of let all that go by being in this natural surrounding with physical labor to do every day. You don't need, I think you've talked about this before, you don't need sleeping pills when you work yourself hard
You don't
all day
you
long.
don't need sleeping pills when you're married to Iris working on the farm. You're gonna go to sleep at
You're
night
gonna
tired.
go to sleep
I've
at
sent
night.
I've sent my boy out there, like when
Yeah,
her
yeah.
husband's on deployment. I'd send my boy out there
He's great.
just to do slave labor out there
Love
and get
him.
after it. let him learn about an honest day's work.
Yeah,
Sleep
yeah.
outside. It's legit. It's I one of the things you had written, and this is different topic, a different article that you had written, and I'm just going to read a little chunk of it because I love it. Here we go. This is about being on the farm with your now. This is when you just had your one daughter.
First, yeah.
Here we go. My garden helper turns 1 year old this week. I remember when life was simpler, when I could work in the garden all day uninterrupted, when I could sleep when I wanted and be out of the house by the early morning. But I didn't laugh nearly as much. My heart wasn't as large. I was more selfish. These days are slow, this baby and I. There are so many little breaks we take, things we get distracted by, things that must be learned. I feel lucky to accomplish 1 or 2 small tasks in a day now. That is enough, though. We manage. There is nowhere she would rather be than in the garden. Makes me happy to see her dirt-streaked face smile. I have gotten past everything having to be clean. Let a child be a little wild. Let her experience the taste of dirt, the feel of leaves, mud, and water. Let her grow in the garden like an artichoke, rambunctious and beautiful. She laughs out loud, throwing her head back to point at the birds. She squeals with delight when she gets a hold of the cat and crawls like mad to get out of the way of the sprinkler. This is nothing that can be replaced by toys, nothing that can be learned from books or videos, parks or playgrounds. This is my sweet child. Sweet as the honeysuckle blossom, dirt and all. Lots of good stuff bringing those kids up on the farm.
Yeah.
And, continuing down that and kind of bringing it up to the present, you wrapped up the article that you wrote about abuse, and you kind of talked about where you're at now. And I'm gonna hit that. The person that I am now, I'm fairly proud of, considering. I carry very few scars from my past other than the physical ones that are carved into my skin. I am comfortable talking about abuse. I can look at pictures of my abuser and feel very little. I am married to a kind and courageous hero of a man. I've built up a beautiful farm. I've got 2 amazing young children who I will protect with my life. Which is really where this story begins. The children. Look around you, please. Look at your own children and other children that you see. Look at your friends and relatives and watch their interactions closely. We fear so many ridiculous things in life, but we don't fear the most common dangers to children nearly enough. We like to think of child molesters as strangers, not the people we know and let into our lives daily. Stay vigilant. Trust your gut instinct if something seems off. Remember, even very young children can keep tremendous secrets. This is uncomfortable. But sometimes uncomfortable things need to be handled head on until they no longer have the power that secrecy and silence gives them. Thanks for listening. Please share and keep the children safe. And we've talked through some of this, but I kind of want to just, you kind of laid out, and you've talked about it already, just in what we've discussed so far, but I think it's worth covering again from your perspective, your thoughts on how to keep children safe and some of the things to watch out for and some of the things to do. Here we go. I think the best answer is talk about uncomfortable topics early and often. Don't just have the talk with kids. Talk to them on a regular basis about their bodies, sex, predators, consent. If they never hear you talk about it, it's going to be harder for them to bring it up to you. I know communication is difficult in many families. Remember, it's not up to the kids to do it. As an adult, you have to initiate hard conversations regularly. Don't ever assume your kid is too young for something to have happened to them. It can literally happen in a few minutes with a friend or family member when you are out of the room. Ask them if they've ever been touched inappropriately or in a way that made them feel uncomfortable. Then ask them again and again a few days later. Bring it up casually the second time. Hey, I was thinking some more about that conversation we had the other day. Give them time to process and decide if they can handle telling you. Do not push kids to hug and kiss people if they are resistant to it, even family members. This is a topic that they should be familiar discussing with you. Everyone treats it like it's this dark secret that we can't talk about. That makes kids feel like they can't talk about it either. Take every opportunity to bring it up in conversation, a news story, a Facebook post, a friend dealing with issues. Talk about what's going on and why. We may think that we are doing our kids a favor by keeping this horrible stuff from them, but the statistics and the women who have spoken out here prove that most likely your child or grandchild will have to deal with it alone if you aren't proactive. If you have 4 female children or grandchildren or nieces, chances are at least one has or will be molested. Some kids just will not talk no matter what. Be observant, and if anything ever seems slightly off, follow your gut instinct. If a child or teen tells you they haven't been touched or molested, don't take their word for it. kids can be amazingly good at keeping secrets. And that's, I think, it's just a great list for people to think about, to put into action, and really a great example to live by, so that you can be aware if this stuff ever happens.
Yeah. I want the subjects to be normalized a lot more than it is. Yeah, it's a horrible thing to talk about, and it's hard to talk to your kids about it, but we have to make it more normal, not only for kids, but for the millions of adults that are out there who've been through it and still don't talk about it. When I first posted what you read, I posted on Facebook, and I had a ton of people send me private messages telling me their own horrible stories. People that I knew, people that were friends of friends, people that I didn't know at all. And I was shocked by a few of the people that I knew who had horrible stories. Kids that I went to high school with, that I knew during the time that their abuse was also going on, told me some things. And everyone just deals with it and doesn't feel like they can talk about it. And it's not right. And so I hope that my coming on here and bringing this to light and being the person that I am and saying, hey, let's have an honest conversation about this, will help someone else, even if one or two other people decide that they can change their life for the better because they hear someone addressing this honestly, or one or two other people look at their kids and the interaction that their neighbor or their friend or their grandpa, uncle, somebody has with their kids, and realizes that there's something not quite right, then everything that I've been through is worth it, because I will have used my experiences to help someone else.
Yeah. Well, definitely appreciate that. And I know we focused a lot on that today. And again, I you as a military wife, I also wanted to take a moment to recognize all those military wives out there that hold the line while their husbands are, deployed overseas in harm's way. And I wrote something for one of my daughters. And at this point, one of my daughters was, quite frankly, not treating my wife with the kind of respect that my wife deserves. It was typical teenager stuff, a roll of the eyes, a flippant comment. Basically, young adolescent girl with young adolescent attitude. What you talked about earlier, no one can tell me anything. I know everything. And in her mind, my wife was just some lady that did the laundry, got the groceries, and cooked dinner. And that's how she treated her. And so I wrote this for my daughter, but I wanted to read it for everyone. And I want to dedicate it not just to my wife, but to all the military wives out there holding the line on the home front. And so this is what I wrote to my daughter. Your mom. I wanted you to know a little bit about your mom. Your mom was a champion horse rider. She rode cross-country races, show jumping, and she did fox hunting. She cared for her horses every day, cleaned them, trained them, and took care of them. She won many victories. Your mom worked since she was little, starting in restaurants, first peeling potatoes, then bussing tables, then cleaning, then waitressing to make money. Your mom went to an extremely good college. Her parents didn't pay for it. She worked through college as a waitress to pay her own way. When your mom got done with college, she took the money she saved and backpacked around the world. She went to Thailand, Malaysia, Hawaii, Australia, New Zealand, and a bunch of other places. While doing that, she worked as a waitress and other odd jobs so she could make money and pay her own way. When your mom got done traveling, the economy was bad and she couldn't find a job, so she went overseas and worked at an airline as a flight attendant, which is a hard, thankless job serving ungrateful passengers on planes. She didn't like it, but she did it. When I met your mom for the first time, she was the most beautiful girl I had ever seen. And when I talked to her, she was the nicest person I have ever met. And she was funny and sassy and sweet, and I knew immediately that I wanted to marry her. So your mom picked up everything and left and came to be with me in America. She moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment with me. She was wonderful. She was adventurous. She surfed with me and she trained jiu-jitsu with me every day and worked out with me every day. She got her blue belt in jiu-jitsu. She worked as an executive assistant in a real estate office and got a real estate license. We went skiing and hiked mountains and camped under the stars in the mountain, and we went dancing at night. She was amazing. I got orders to move to Virginia. She instantly packed up everything we had and quit her job and moved across country. When we got to Virginia, she got a tough job working for an insurance company. Of course, I was in a SEAL platoon, so I traveled all the time and was gone all the time, and she never complained. One day she told me she was pregnant. That was you. She was so happy. And then the day after you were born, I left on deployment for 7 months. She did everything by herself. I was gone. She never complained. And she sent me a picture every day of you. When I got home from deployment, she was already back in shape and looked amazing. The Navy gave me orders back to California. Without a word, your mom packed away all of our stuff, quit her job, and we moved back to California. I worked and went to school. I never got up in the night to help take care of you. It was always your mom every time. She changed every diaper, made every meal, dried every tear, read every goodnight book. I worked, went to school, and trained jiu-jitsu. She never complained one single time. Soon she told me she was pregnant again. That was your first sister. When your first sister came, now everything that your mom did for you, she had to do for your sister too. Every diaper, every meal, every tear, every little book read. I was working and going to school and training. She walked you both and read to you and took you to parks and playgroups and dancing lessons and swimming lessons and craft fairs. She did everything for you. She didn't get to surf anymore or do jiu-jitsu anymore or work out or hike with me anymore. She devoted all that time to you, her kids, who she cherished. She never complained or whined or asked for anything. Then she got pregnant again. This time it was your brother. She kept doing everything for you when she got her morning sickness, throwing up, dizzy, and carrying around a baby in her belly. She didn't complain ever. When she was in the bathroom, sick and throwing up, she would apologize to you and your sister that you girls had to see her like that. Then the war started. I went back to the SEAL teams. I went to Iraq for 6 months. I was working so much that I barely got time to write. Your mom always wrote me. She never complained about anything. She did everything by herself. Everything. I was taking care of my SEAL platoon, and she took care of you 3 little kids. She cleaned everything, made every meal, changed every diaper, dried every tear, took you to lessons and parks and doctor's appointments, and read to you every night, and made your lunches, and got groceries. She did this all by herself. No in-laws to help out, no grandparents around, just her alone. When I came home, things didn't get any better. I just started getting ready to go back to Iraq again. She didn't complain. Some guys had to worry about their families. Their wives would complain and cry and file for divorce and fight over the kids. I never worried about that at all. Your mom took care of everything and never made me have to worry about you kids or her or anything else. My last deployment to Iraq, I was gone almost 7 months. I left your mom alone again with you 3 kids. Some of my men were wounded and killed. Your mom went to the hospital to visit the wounded men and went to the funerals of my friends. Your mom knew at any time it could be me that was wounded or killed. But she never complained. She cried with the moms of my friends. She gave support where she could, but she never asked me to stop or come home or leave early or even be safe. Never. She never asked me to give anything to her. She knew I had men to take care of. She told me not to worry about her or all you kids. She only told me to do my best at my job and take care of my friends on the battlefield. Most SEALs get divorced, almost 90%. There is too much pressure and separation and distance and too many challenges, and many women can't take it, so they leave. Your mom never wavered. She never had an issue or a complaint, no matter what happened or when I came home or when I left or what I did. She supported me always, and she took care of you kids every day, every night, every moment. Every need you had was her responsibility. She never asked for thanks or appreciation, and when it was her birthday or our anniversary, she would tell me not to get her anything so we could save money. When I got home from my last deployment to Iraq, your mom got pregnant again. That was your youngest sister, and she did it all again. Morning sickness, diapers, sleepless nights, puke in the bed, pee on the floor, chicken pox, lice, tears, scrapes, bumps, bruises, teacher conferences, school lunches, everything. She never complained about it. I was still working, preparing men for war and traveling all the time, and she continued to take care of you kids so I could do my job. Your mom has stuck with me through hell. It has been hard. Your mom has been married to this hard-headed frogman for 17 years. She's been through multiple wartime deployments. She has helped me when I was sick or injured, and she has done the same for you. She has done it because she is strong and determined, and she loves our family more than anything in the world. Your mom is an incredible person, an amazing woman, and I worship her. She is everything I ever wanted. So, when you get the chance, you should tell your mom that you love her, that you know how much she has done for you and for our family, and that you appreciate everything that she has done for us and for you. I hope you grow up and have some of the same qualities that she possesses. Strength, honor, intelligence, dignity, selflessness, respect, determination, and kindness. That's your mom. And I hope you realize how blessed you are to have her. And that's the note that I wrote to my daughter. And, you know, there's some people that say a woman can do anything that a man can do. And I don't know if that's true or not. But I can tell you this, I don't know of too many men that can do what my wife has done and what thousands of other military wives have done. And I want to recognize how blessed we are as a nation to have these women out there holding the line on the home front. A job, and yes, it is a job that is under-recognized and overlooked all the time. And Iris, like my own wife, I think you are a stellar example of this.
Thank you.
No, thank you for what you have done for your family, but also what you have done for our country in supporting your husband and your family. And thank you. And obviously, thank you for coming on here today to teach all of us about a subject that we all need to know more about, not just abuse, but also determination. And on top of that, determination to overcome what you experienced in your life, but the determination to keep a family together and protect the protectors.
Well, it's been a incredible honor to be here, and thank you guys for stepping out of the box a little bit with me and getting this out there and talking about some of this stuff. And I love, what you wrote to your daughter, and your wife is still stunningly beautiful and very kind.
She is indeed. And it's, having you on the podcast was a no-brainer. I probably waited 3 or 4 months to broach the subject with your husband. I was waiting for the right moment, and he said something to me about it, and I was like, hey, if she ever just happens to want to come on, let me know. And he answered me in 30 seconds. And it wasn't his answer. He said, I just talked to her. She's good to go. I was like, yes. So it's been great having you on the podcast.
Huge honor. Thank you, guys.
Well, speaking of the podcast.
Sure.
Echo Charles. I mean, if somebody wanted to support this podcast, is there any way they can do that?
Yeah, there is actually. This is kind of we talk about these heavy things. This is kind of the time to decompress a little bit, right?
A little bit.
We can talk about supporting the podcast.
That's a good way to decompress.
Yeah, I think so. Most of the time. Let's talk about supporting ourselves now. You know, because actually a lot of it, like being like a strong military wife and all this stuff, even just a normal.
And you know this, I'm going to say this too. I didn't say this. There's military husbands as well.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And they're doing all that stuff that I talked about. I was talking about wives because that's what I deal with. I dealt with my wife, you know, and you're a military wife. The guys that are out there holding down the fort, and also there's guys that are married to police officers. I know that gets flipped sometimes, and respect.
Yeah.
Respect. Equally challenging for anybody that's holding down the fort at home. So,
yeah, it's the concept, right?
Yes.
You know, a lot of times, especially when you're dealing with kids and, the responsibility is on me or whatever. And I mentioned this before where it's easy to fall into that kind of mindset where you're making it about yourself now, you know, where you have kids and it's like, hey, I changed the diaper last time, you know, but if you notice, you're talking about yourself now. The diaper got to get changed regardless, but you're like focusing on the fact that you had to do it, you know, kind of thing. So not that you're wrong, but you chose to make it about yourself. So the less you make it about yourself and more about the mission, the family, the whatever it is that you're doing, the stronger you're going to have the capability to be, you know, you can like solve the problems and, you know, accomplish the mission. Anyway, so that being said, let's make it about ourselves for a second by supporting ourselves. So this is kind of a flip. You know how you switch it. You know how like in the airplane they say support yourself before you support the kid.
Yeah, you got to put the oxygen.
You got to put the oxygen. You know what I mean? Because if you support yourself, you have more capability of supporting others.
True thing.
True story, right? Mm-hmm. That's why, like the stronger you are.
Echo's all excited. He's got Iris over here. She's agreeing.
Yeah,
She's in the game with him. Echo's like blowing me off. He's not even looking at me. He's talking to Iris now.
Because she knows she mentioned Alpha Brain, all these things. And I started taking more Alpha Brain, by the way.
I think I noticed that today. You were sharp, man.
Well,
you were crisp with the thoughts.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I felt like I was a bit distracted. Not necessarily here, but just in life. You know, I couldn't like focus on the thing that I needed.
Like
to
making videos?
On. Or what? No, I've been making videos, bro.
I've noticed that.
Yeah.
That's good. That's
yeah,
good.
man.
We like that.
Anyway, if you're working out, you want supplementation, you want some support in the workout, which actually I'm down for now. I wasn't a supplement person before, as I said before. But now I am because there's supplements like krill oil. You know strong bone?
Yeah.
Is that for like bones too?
It might be, but I don't know. My bones seem strong. I don't break them very often, but my joints want help. So I take it for the joints.
Yeah. Because usually when like your tendon like, you know how I rip my bicep or whatever, it's the tendon ripping off the bone.
Yeah.
So you figure joints, maybe that's, you know, the strong bone that's the part of it that makes
homework. Do some research, get back to me.
Anyway, if you want the good supplements, krill oil for your joints, that's a big one. In my opinion, in Jocko's opinion.
My opinion.
Iris's opinion.
Boom.
Sure. Yeah.
Man, essential.
So whether you're working out or whether you're actually working on the farm.
Yes.
Krill
oil all up in it. That's a good one. But as far as supplements go, you know you get the good ones when you get Onnit ones. Anyway, if you want 10% off, onnit.com/Jocko. My joints, here's the thing, like I'll bust out krill oil whenever it's applicable in my mind. And people be like, oh, you always talk about krill oil. No. But I feel like it's kind of always on my mind because, you know, like, okay, I'm talking to Greg, right, the other day. I don't think Greg's on the krill oils. We're talking.
He should be.
It's after where he should be.
Yeah.
We're talking for a while about stuff or whatever. So, it's time to go. We get up, Greg. He goes,
no,
like that.
Oh no!
I understand that he didn't have to make that noise, but him making that noise is an indicator.
Full indicator.
That he's missing his krill oil.
Somebody order that man krill oil.
Exactly
ASAP.
right. That's exactly what I thought. I didn't say nothing, but that's what I thought.
Why didn't you say anything? That's kind of
time and place. Maybe it was like
he'll hear it on the
too
podcast.
New. It was too fresh.
So let's just make this just for this whole advertisement's for Greg Train. Train
get on the krill oil.
Do it,
and you won't. And it's less about making that kind of noise or not making the noise. It's the feeling that compelled him to make the noise. That's the important part.
What if Greg Train wanted 10% off? What would he do then? I'm trying to help this along.
No, man. Okay. If he chose to get 10%, onnit.com/Jocko. The /Jocko, that's the part that gives you the 10% off on all your stuff, even if you like protein powders and whatnot, which is good too, by the way.
Yeah.
Anyway, look on there, see what because it depends your lifestyle. You see what I'm saying? Anyway,
It does.
you get it. You get my drift. Okay,
I think we do.
That's a good way to support yourself and the podcast, and ultimately everyone around you.
Actually, everyone in the world. Will be more supportive.
Ultimately, yeah. It's like the butterfly effect, like us talking, it'll affect China later. Anyway, Amazon click-through, that's a good way to support too, by the way. So what that does is, before you do your shopping, you click through the website, JockoPodcast.com. There's a tab on the top, banner on the bottom. Thing is, with the banner, I'm only saying this because people hit me up about it, and they'll say, "Hey, I don't see the banner. Your banner's not there on the website." If you have an ad blocker, which is a smart thing to have, by the way, just generally speaking, if you have an ad blocker, it'll block certain things, and sometimes that banner will fall within the confines of things that the ad blocker blocks.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
Well,
Anyway,
you know what? We could also change our whole attitude here and make the full focus of the podcast and the website and everything that we're doing to get people to get into to give us money.
yeah.
We're not going to do that.
Right. So, now that I'm thinking and talking to you guys about it, I'm like, man, I should really go change that. But when I go home or when I go, other places, I'm thinking about getting after it. I'm thinking about making videos, what have you. So, I get reminded about. So, and maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing. But nonetheless, those are the facts as of right now. But it doesn't matter because there's a tab on the top. Like I said, click on that one. If you want to support, it takes 3 seconds. Small action. And that support that everyone's been giving, big reaction.
And somehow this supports China, you were saying?
It can ultimately, yes. It's the butterfly effect. Look into it.
Okay.
Look it up.
It's real. Yeah, it's real. You can subscribe to the podcast. And this is on any podcasting providing platform. Google Play, iTunes, of course, Stitcher.
Yeah.
All that.
You can write a review too, which I've read some live reviews on here of Jocko White Tea, but I might do that with the podcast because there's some really good ones there too. I was actually thinking of doing a Facebook Live and reading the comments on a picture that Joe Rogan posted of me, because there are some funny comments.
Yeah.
Some pro comedians out there listening to Joe Rogan, so they want to make fun of my head.
Yeah.
But they're worth reading.
There was, remember that video that we made, actually, it might have been before the first podcast even. Maybe after. I don't know. Anyway, we made it, and it was about martial arts training.
Oh, yeah.
And you're, what's the best martial arts and self-defense, all this stuff, right? So I revisited that, and this was a while ago. There's there's over 1 million views on that.
Right.
So with views come comments, right?
Yeah.
So
you like that, don't you?
and typically, it's usually not very productive to spend much time in the comments section on YouTube, but a lot of views, a lot of comments. Let's see what and it's not like people who necessarily follow Jocko Podcast. That's the thing.
There's random people.
So you get a cool little variety of people in there. So yeah, there's some interesting ones in there. I didn't quote any or nothing or save any, but I'm just saying, generally speaking, it's interesting. Nonetheless, back to subscribing to the podcast.
Speaking of YouTube.
Yeah, we have a YouTube channel. If you like the video version of this podcast, sometimes people know what you look like.
Yeah.
But a smaller percentage of people know what I look like.
Yeah.
And I'm not encouraging you to watch the video to see what I look like. I'm not saying that.
Echo doesn't look like what he sounds like.
You definitely
apparently.
look different than you sound.
Had you ever seen him before today?
I've seen pictures of you
okay.
online, and I was surprised when I did because you sounded sort of, well, no, I'm not going to say what you sounded like, but you didn't sound the way you look.
I've heard
We'll assume that's not
white
good.
hipster.
Yeah,
White hipster.
Something like that.
One guy said a mixed white and Latino, not hipster, not skater, I don't know, something. Anyway, they got real specific, which is good, which is cool.
Yeah.
I dig it. But
Well, yeah, I guess it's because you have a weird background being a Hawaiian. What are you, half black, half white guy?
Yeah, I mean, not to split hairs, but there's some Native American in there
And
too,
Native
on both
American.
sides.
But see, none of that
Melting
has
pot.
anything to do with the way you talk.
Yeah.
The way you talk
Or
is
look-
just the way
or-
you talk.
Yeah.
Well, it has something to do with the way you look.
Yeah, it does. I don't know why I said that, but growing up in Kauai and then living here and then, I don't know, talking to you all the time, all this stuff. You know? It just jumbled me up, you know? Anyway, back to the YouTube
If you want to
thing.
see what he looks like, you can check him out.
If you're
on
interested
YouTube.
in something like that, if that interests you, subscribing to the YouTube channel might facilitate
Because
that.
conversely, I look like what people
Exactly.
think I'm going to look like.
Yeah,
That's what I look like.
Yeah, exactly.
True.
Exactly true. So yeah, the YouTube also, my looks aside, what we do now is, and we've been doing this for a little bit, is we'll take out little excerpts of the podcast, little lessons, and we'll put them on there as well, so you can share them. You know, it's easier than sharing the whole podcast and having people receive it. You know, because you can't just listen to 2.5 hours on a whim. You know,
No.
But 3
you
minutes.
actually have to kind of schedule that.
You gotta schedule it. Yes, exactly right.
3 minutes, though? No schedule
No-
required.
no schedule.
Boom.
Yeah.
Press play.
Right now.
Yeah.
You know, lesson learned. Boom.
Yeah.
Individual lesson.
Life
So-
improved. Good to go.
Yep.
Rock
check.
and roll.
Yes, exactly. So that's really the goal there. And you know, I gotta be honest, like people have said, you know, I always say this. People have been asking me. It's one person. No,
Yeah.
in my case, people have been saying, like, that's good to have those ones because some people they don't listen to the podcast like the first day. You know, they're like how you said they kind of got to schedule.
Well,
it.
even
It's my Friday.
somebody, we got a lot of commuters. A lot
Yeah.
of people listen to this car.
Yeah.
But, half an hour commute, it takes you, a few days to hear the whole podcast, but there
Yeah.
might have been a little nugget you needed for work that Monday.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some people they'll say that helped me that day, like the college one that you talk about,
Yeah.
like how to approach college.
Yeah.
Legit. Anyway,
Don't
so
you wish you had that when you approached college?
I wish I had all of this really when I approached anything in life really. But yes, the college, yes. So yeah, subscribe to the YouTube, man. That's a good one. That's a good way to support, and that's another way to support yourself in a way, kind of indirectly. And then if you wear T-shirts at any point, and you want to represent a little bit, we got some cool T-shirts. I think
I think they're pretty cool.
approved,
They are approved, quite literally.
all approved
And
stuff.
there's a new T-shirt out, which you are wearing at this time.
I like it.
It's real complex.
yeah, bro.
It's black and it says "Get After It" on it.
Hey man, technically it's a charcoal heather, but
Fashion guy.
hey man, it is what it is, and there's usually more to them than kind of meets the eye. We call that layers in a philosophical sense. But yeah, if you want to support that way, that's a good way, and you get a shirt that you can wear, very wearable. That's the thing. They're not the cheap ballpark giveaway shirts. They're like good, very wearable. Multiple occasions, people say it's my favorite shirt to wear because of the fit.
People are telling you that.
People every single day, all day. Yeah, I'm telling you. Women's stuff on their shirts, patches, rash guards. I'm gonna put out a new rash guard here pretty soon. Not that that's like supposed to get everyone fired up or nothing like that. I'm just
I'm
throwing
pretty
it out
fired
there.
up.
Yeah, it's good. The hoodies are on there as well, and if you like any of this stuff, I'd say just look at it. If you choose to support, if you feel like supporting, you feel like representing, go ahead and get something.
It's a good way to support you.
Yep. And also, this what I'm about to tell you here could very well border on essential. Now, it's like one of those things where, okay, so psychological warfare. I'm going to go into it. So, you know how like, let's say you're getting after it, Iris is getting after it, I'm getting after it. I start taking krill oil, Iris starts taking krill oil, Jocko is not taking krill oil. Maybe someone else comes in, they start getting after it, meanwhile, you're not taking the krill oil. We're kind of ahead of you, You see what I'm
Getting
saying?
a little soft, Jocko.
You understand what I'm saying? No, conceptually, that's a big deal. So, Psychological Warfare, what that does is, Psychological Warfare is an album with tracks, with Jocko on there, put simply, Jocko on there, helping you through any moments of weakness that you may have on your getting after it journey. Waking up early in the morning every day, slipping on the diet, procrastinating, all these things. Yeah, big deal. So,
If you think about just the procrastination one,
yeah.
procrastination is one of those things. it's a massive problem with people, right? People all over the world have a massive problem with procrastination. Think of how easy it is to overcome that.
Yeah.
It's the easiest thing.
Yeah.
It's the easiest thing to overcome. Psychological warfare.
Yeah.
You just go do what you're procrastinating, and it's already, you won. It's not like you have to work to get over procrastination. You just crush it. Just go.
It's back the other day or last week, whatever, when I said, like, you got to switch it to manual. And for procrastination, you just got to switch it to manual for like literally 2 seconds.
Yeah.
1, 2, boom, and then you do it.
Because once you're starting.
Right, you're doing it.
Yeah.
You are no longer procrastinating.
Yeah.
By its definition.
What an easy battle to win, and what a battle that so many people face and lose.
Bro, it's one of those psychological things that you kind of got to declare war on, and in that case, you're engaging in psychological warfare. Nonetheless, this is a good way to... So back to my point about when everyone starts getting after it and you're not. So I don't want to feel that. Like, everyone's like, psychological warfare, because you can't listen to it and like, hey, I don't want to wake up. I want to press the snooze. You can't listen to wake up, one of the first tracks or whatever. You can't listen to that and then not wake up. You can't. You won't be able to face yourself. It's like one of those things it's like that strong. So let's say everyone's doing that. You're kind of left behind if you're not. That's how I feel. Like, if I'm not doing it, I'll do it. Even if I feel like working out, I'll still listen to it.
Give you a little kick.
Anyway, psychological warfare. Jocko Willem.
I was looking at an audiobook the other day. It's still number 1, by the way. Man, number 1 on spoken word on iTunes.
Wow.
See? Everyone's getting on it? Yeah, man.
It's been that way since it came out.
So
everyone that you're telling to get after it, they're getting after it.
That's exactly right. That's part of my point right there. Like, you got to do it.
Also, on when you're clicking through Amazon, you can also get Jocko white tea. And here's the bottom line: we all need to deadlift more.
Yes.
All right.
Sure.
Don't play around. If you order your Jocko white tea, you're going to boost your deadlift to approximately 8,000 pounds. And I was thinking about this the other day. You think 8,000 pounds is heavy? It's in another unit of measurement. It's 4 tons, bro.
Yeah, I think that's heavy.
That's good, man. Yeah. That's really good. You want to do that. Way of the Warrior Kid. By the way, it's not even pre-order anymore because it comes out May 2nd, right? So it's coming out soon. Boom. Order it now and save a child, smash a bully, save yourself, smash pull-ups. That's the overall messaging.
Bro, I was at the Padre game yesterday, and so there's a playground there, and the kids are just kind of running amok, and a lot of times there's parents in there, and there's this one kid, he was big, and he had that look on his face. I'm not saying he was a bully, but he's walking around, he was like grabbing another kid. I don't know if it was his brother, I don't know if he was bullying him or helping him or whatever, but you could tell, like, in all the little kids' face. Because, there's some people, they're, like, there's a line for this little thing that kids get on. It's like it's not a merry-go-round. It's a thing you sit in. And so some kids are real assertive. They'll be like, oh, it's my turn. Cut in the line, not even realizing there's a line or whatever. Then there's some kids, they'll stand in line and they'll just sort of let people just cut.
Right.
And then there's some kids who are like, oh, wait. And they'll explain there's a line, so you can see the different levels.
There's different people out there.
Yeah. So, like, something like this, that's going to turn you into, the person who's, it's kind of like the leader kid.
Going to turn you into the little leader. It sounds like Kenny Williamson might have been out there. Kenny Williams is a bully.
Potentially.
Now, interestingly, I'm doing there's a lot of, I asked questions, who should read the audio for this, right? Because if I was thinking I would just read the whole thing, then some people said, hey, Jocko, you're not a kid, and it's a kid's voice. It's in the first person of a kid's voice. Kid's named Mark. So I couldn't read the kid's part. I decided, you know what? I'm not going to read the whole book. I'm not going to read the kid's part. But there's a character in there named Uncle Jake.
Sure.
Now, Uncle Jake, he was a SEAL.
Sure.
And he's going to come and help out. And I decided maybe I could read Uncle Jake parts. So I did.
Seems like
and then we got a kid reading the kid's part, and I think you all find out who that is, and I think there'll be some layers behind that part even. Yes. So, yeah, Way of the Warrior Kid. You can order that now. You can also get Discipline Equals Freedom. Field Manual is coming out. What's a field manual? It's something that allows you to take information and put it into action. That's what the Discipline Equals Freedom Field Manual is going to do. Comes out October 17th. Might seem like that's a long ways away, but so did May 2nd, right?
Yeah.
But this thing's coming out around the corner. So the Field Manual, it's basically this podcast in a book. You can't bring this podcast into the field with you. I guess you can put it on your headphones. I guess maybe you can. But sometimes you need visual cues.
Yeah.
So that's what it is. The thoughts, the things from the podcast, but then it also has very specific additional information like workouts, sleep strategies, martial arts, everything that's cool in the world. It's all in the book. So you can do that. Extreme Ownership. You can, by the way, why is Extreme Ownership still one of the top books on Amazon and iTunes and Audible a year and a half after it came out? Why is that? Is it because of the big advertising campaign that we did? No, it's not because of that. It's purely because of word of mouth. So everyone that's listening to this right now that's buying it for other people and spreading the word, it's because of you. That's awesome. Appreciate it. Extreme Ownership, Amazon. Why is it not out on paperback yet? Do you want to know why?
Yeah.
You know why?
Yeah.
It's not out on paperback because people ask me, why isn't it on paperback? It's not out on paperback yet because books come out on paperback when they aren't selling the hardcover anymore.
Oh,
they re-release a cheaper version. Here it is in paperback. Now it's only $9.95. They haven't done that with our book yet. Why? People still want the hardcover. It's still selling. And the reason for that is because it works, because people get a lot out of it. So if you don't have Extreme Ownership, or if someone that you know doesn't have Extreme Ownership, it's just like they don't have krill oil. Tell Greg Train he needs krill oil. Tell your subordinate leader or your superior leader or members of your team.
Yeah.
Tell them, hey, look, man, I'm going to get you a little something here for it's going to help you out.
Yeah.
Extreme Ownership. And if you need some more Extreme Ownership at your team, company, contact, whatever, you can contact our company, Echelon Front. Leif, Babin, myself, Dave Burke, JP Donnell, Leadership and Management Consultants. If you want to bring us on board, contact us, info@echelonfront.com. And also, along the same vein, if you don't know, we have the muster coming up, number 002, in New York City at the Marriott Grand Marquis. Come get your leadership on. You will become a better leader, period. Leif's going to be there. JP's going to be there. Dave Burke is going to be there. Well, I'm going to be there. Echo Charles is going to be there. And a ton of people that listen to this podcast and that we've worked with are going to be there. Come and get it. We'll see you there. And until we do get to the muster, if you want to communicate with us, you can find us cruising on the interwebs. Now, first of all, we're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. You can also find us on the Facebookie if you can find us there. So, Iris.
Yes.
For Facebook, where are you at?
You can follow my farm on Primeval. It's Primeval Gardens on Facebook and Instagram. And then I'm on Twitter at only Iris Gardner.
And I just told Iris to sign up for that this morning.
I'm not a Twitterer, but yeah. I will.
That's
be
what
there.
Tim Ferriss did to me too.
Yeah.
He was like, "Oh, just sign up for Twitter. No big deal." And then a bunch of people were like asking me questions.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is, that's what makes it cool.
Yeah.
Is you can communicate with all these different people, and they can give you good information. They can tell you what books to read, and they can tell you what speeches to listen to, and they can tell you what YouTube videos to check out, and they can tell you what jiu-jitsu is good. It's awesome. Yeah. It's a great way of communicating with a bunch of people. So
you know
that's
why they
the
call
Twitter.
it Twitter?
I don't actually.
Because, like back in the day, they sent messages with pigeons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They send the message.
Carrier
That's
pigeons,
what it is.
right?
So it's like when you send someone a message, it's called a tweet.
Yeah, but what does that have to do with
Pigeons
Twitter?
don't tweet, though. They coo.
I don't know the details. I'm just saying birds tweeting messages. That's what Twitter is.
Interesting.
Oh, okay. So it's related to birds.
Sure.
And message pigeons.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right.
Which now
coo.
that we have an animal expert in the room, they don't tweet. They need to change the name of Twitter to
no, they have to change the name of tweeting, the act of tweeting to that noise. That you just,
cooing.
Instead of tweeting.
Awesome.
But that's what it is, just little messages,
Okay, interesting.
Sweet, simple.
Echo?
Yes.
You got anything else for us today?
Yeah, you said you your dad made gold bars?
Yeah.
How big were the bars? Because, you know, you get
Echo's
the little...
thinking maybe that's a second
No.
career.
Yeah,
he's rocking
yeah.
all
No,
over
that
here.
was like the
there.
phrase it stuck with me.
Yeah. You know,
you
there.
get little like gold kind of crumbs, right? First.
Yeah, you get just little fragments
Flecks.
of pieces when you crush up ore.
Yeah.
You just get, if you're like going in the streams and creeks, you'll come out with gold nuggets, which are naturally forming larger. But when you're crushing up ore, you just get little tiny flecks of gold, and then you refine it down into a bar. And I don't remember. I think, you know, they do them in a few ounces to whatever
like
size makes sense to sell.
You hear the word gold bar, you're thinking, you know, like on the movie. You ever watch Three Kings?
Yeah, not
Remember that
like a 10-pound
one? Yeah.
brick or whatever it is, but yeah, smaller bars.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, bro.
Is that your final question?
That was it, man.
Awesome. Iris, anything else you want to close out with?
Gosh, no, just thanks for doing this. Thanks for getting me on here, and love listening to the show. I listen to it when I'm out working, getting after it. I need a get after it shirt.
You got
Yeah,
it.
well, I always like going over to your house because you and your husband
Yeah.
both want to expand the conversation and point stuff out to me and ask about this. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
always awesome to have you guys listening. But
Thank you.
anything else?
I think we're good.
Well, obviously, thank you for coming on. Seriously, I think it's awesome. I think it's courageous and brave and really helpful for a lot of people.
I hope so.
And thank you for that. Thank you for giving us a warning that evil can hide anywhere, right under our noses, and slink around and trying to corrupt those that are closest to us. So thanks for telling us to hug our children, to hold our children, and to watch our children closely. And also, thank you for reminding us once again that in the end, evil cannot win if we decide that we will not let it. Because if we confront the darkness, if we stand up with courage and we look upward toward the sky, the light will shine on our faces and wash out the darkness and bring us warmth and hope and happiness. And thank you for showing us once again that even with the evil and the darkness of the world, and even with the scars that they can leave, even still, even with all that, this life is as sweet as the honeysuckle blossom, dirt and all. So until next time, this is Iris and Echo and Jocko.